my phone doesn't ring. All right. Uh, Thank you for being here. Good evening, good morning, wherever you may be. Thank you. My name is Lisa Loving, and I am here to talk a little bit about my book, which is called Street Journalist, Understand and Report the News in Your Community. We are at Bird and Beckett Book and Records and Books in San Francisco. Tonight, we're talking about World Press Freedom Day, and I wanted to share a handful of tools that you can use to tell the stories in your community, because I strongly believe, and I want you to understand that you can be telling the stories of your community, your grassroots stories, and that can impact the world. And we're going to talk about that a bit. Before we do that, I want to thank Eric Whittington of Bird and Beckett Books and Musics for celebrating World Press Freedom Day. We're here at his bookstore. Thank you. I want to thank Christina Deptula and Authors Large and Small for thinking about it in the first place and coming up with this idea for this event. Thank you. I want to thank Gustavo Arellano for shouting me out on his weekly newsletter, and I want you to look for him in the Los Angeles Times and beyond. Gustavo Arellano, amazing person. I also want to thank Dennis Bernstein of Flashpoints at KPFA in Berkeley for bringing me on the air earlier tonight and letting me rabbit hole on how important your work is. You, who's watching this right now. It's important, I'm telling you. Also, my sister Sandy and my mom Betty for helping me be here tonight, and my whole family for always encouraging me. I want to start out as we talk about using tools of journalism to cover your local community. I want to start out just by reading a part of Street Journalist. It's actually secretly the most important part of this book. And it's my house rules for journalism. Okay. We're going to talk about what is journalism, what's grassroots journalism, and why it's important. But before we even do that, I want you to know what I'm talking about when I say journalism and when I say reporting, okay? With that perspective in mind, here are some fundamental ground rules. If you're not fact-checking, it's not journalism. Be aware of the difference between news reporting and opinion writing. Don't confuse the two. Sometimes journalism has a strong element of advocacy. If your vision for street reporting involves some call to action, be upfront about explaining why you're doing it, what you want people to do, and how others can help. Okay? Be an advocate for everyday people. Real information is better than opinions. And never make stuff up. It's a little more explicit in this book. Never make stuff up. No rage tweeting or screaming in anger at people on the phone, in person, or in the digital world whatsoever, including press conferences. No rage tweeting or screaming in anger at people. Think twice and then a third time about how your reporting will impact every individual and organization named in your story. Make it a priority never to impact innocent people badly with your work. And lastly, if you're not fact-checking, it's not journalism. Okay? We'll talk about this book a little bit more later. Okay, I want to get to the gist of what I wanted to talk about tonight. I don't know if you've got the Chiani app, but like Mercury's in retrograde. What could possibly go wrong? Just kidding. As I said, I'm from Portland, Oregon. After the death of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police in 2020, my town, Portland, Oregon, it's one of the whitest towns in the United States, erupted in 200 days and nights of protest in support of the Black Lives Matter movement against racism and police violence. In the same moment, activists and observers including everyday people who started out by simply pointing their phones at rapidly escalating police violence, launched a new movement in grassroots media. Their work landed in MSNBC, CNN, the New York Times, and news outlets around the world. What can we learn about the future of news from these grassroots pioneers of breaking news reporting? Can we build on their experience and their work that continues today in creating a smart, informative news media now? And what about you? I'm pointing at you. I don't know where you are right now. You could be anywhere. What about you? What if you or someone you know had the tools to bring real information to the table and actually inform people in your local community and beyond? That's what I want to talk about right now. I already introduced myself. I'm Lisa. I have been a journalist since I was 14 years old. That's the first time I started writing news for publication at my high school newspaper. Shout out to high school newspapers. My whole life, I've done nothing but gather information, meet people, and build relationships in my local community. If you read my book, you can see it behind me here. Street Journalist, a lot of it is about how to build relationships, how to be relational in information gathering and dissemination. It really is about being relational. It just happens that, and this is my theory, if you use the tools of grassroots media, and the book, I'm pointing to the book, right? The book actually it's got a lot more detail than what we're going to talk about tonight. You can get it online, or you can get it at Beckett Books and Music. It's published by Microcosm Books in Portland. You can get it there, and you can get it at pals.com as well. When you look at the tools of grassroots journalism and how to use them, they're the same actions that you do when you're building community, when you're organizing your community. You know, we spent decades, generations organizing our communities around politics, political parties, political issues. But I think that you can also actually organize your community around information that can impact these things. One of the things that really strikes me, and I was talking with Dennis Bernstein about this earlier today, there's stories that go unreported in my town all the time, and I'm sure there's stories that go unreported in your town as well, wherever you may be. And, you know, years ago, there was a movement to try to get mainstream publications to cover nonprofit organizations and activist groups because they didn't. And when you look at the news that's not really being reported now, a lot of it has to do with the solutions that people are bringing to problems, gun violence, public health problems, poverty in general, right? When we take the time to cover our movements and cover just the experiential wisdom that's emerging from our trans communities, this is what's really missing. And when I've mentioned this a little earlier, I'm visiting my mom in the central San Joaquin Valley, and we are watching a lot of MSNBC, a lot of it. They don't cover that. They cover the problems, but they don't cover what people are doing about it. When you begin to understand that there's activist groups, neighbors, neighborhood associations, individual people who are organizing around trans rights, youth empowerment, that's where the real, what am I going to say? That's where the hope emerges. It's the antidote to the kind of despair I feel when I'm watching. Like, listen, Rachel Maddow, I like you, I love you, but come on, like I can't just eat beef all day. I need some beets. I need some vegetables. I need to see the real nuts and bolts of what people are doing. Nobody has to eat beets or beef all day. This was just an example. Eat what you want. Anyway, don't let me rabbit hole food because I love food. But anyway, that's one of the keys when we look at who should be creating their own media outlet, who should be creating their own platform for reporting, and what does that look like? Because you don't need a master's degree to do that. You don't even need a college degree to do that. There's all kinds of people that do that all the time. And I want to talk a little bit later too, which is probably like in 10 minutes, right? About how you can monetize what you're doing. I have a theory that in my town, I live in Oregon, where the Oregonian newspaper hasn't been a daily in many years. But for many people, if the story doesn't appear in the Oregonian, then it doesn't exist, right? But the Oregonian is part of a news model in which a local publication is controlled, funded, and managed from the East Coast. It can never be smart. It can never benefit our local community. I love you, Oregonian staff, if any of you are watching this, okay? It's not your fault. And don't even get me started on Rupert Murdoch, because that is a very deep rabbit hole for Lisa Loving. Catch me on social media and we can dialogue about that. Anyway, so one of the inspirations for this talk tonight was the old quote by Jello Biafra: "Don't hate the media, become the media." And that's, if you don't take anything else away from this tonight, I want you to remember that. Don't hate the media, become the media. Almost every innovation that has happened in mass media in the last 20 years has happened by individuals, through individuals who had an idea. Some of them were rich, some of them weren't rich, but none of them came out of a newsroom. And that I really want you to know. You don't have to be part of some organized something to be able to be impactful. All right? Okay, so I'm going to jump into, I've got 7 ways to organize your community around information. And you know me, if you've heard me talk before, I'm just going to keep repeating. All of this stuff, you're going to fact check it. Fact checking is your friend. And the other point I always make is be autodidactic. Always be prepared to teach yourself new things. No one had heard of TikTok 10 years ago. Well, we used to do Vine, whatever. Be autodidactic. Expect the tools to change. It's nobody's job to teach you what is some new thing that's coming up. And also, you could be the innovator. I always want to encourage people to use the tools for a purpose that they were not intended. And that's just an open-ended invitation. All right. Okay. So I'm just going to jump in here. Some of these things might sound boring. Some of the things that our communities need to hear about are the boring municipal meetings where, we might say to ourselves, people are smoking cigars in a darkened room and they're coming up with like whatever is the Supreme Court going to do next. I didn't just say that. We're talking about local communities. So one brilliant thing that anyone can do, and it doesn't cost a penny, is to pick a public body or process and just follow it. Pick a public body or process and follow it. And when we do that, you can find, Twitter, TikTok, if you will, a blog, YouTube, any of these tools you can use to get the word out. And I want to shout out Brandy Buckman. Brandy Buckman was a news editor at BuzzFeed, I believe, and she started covering the Proud Boys. What is it? Their trial, because they're accused of all kinds of things. I was just listening to it, and the charges against them have grown as well. But they are being charged with, I believe, sedition, and their trial has been happening for like 4 months now. Brandy Buckman started out on a news staff, and then one day in the middle of the trial, she was laid off. Unbelievable. And what she's been doing is live tweeting it. She live tweets every day's, and the trial it's being deliberated by the jury right now. But every day she would live tweet what was happening in the courtroom. And at the end of the day, she would compile her tweets into a long blog format. So when she was laid off, another blog picked her up called Empty Wheel. Empty Wheel. Look for that blog. You can look for them on Twitter, but look for Brandy Buckman on Twitter, and that's BrandiBuchman. A master of the medium. She also is a person who has previously worked for a fantastic media outlet called Courthouse News. The Courthouse News Service, you've probably never heard of it, but they have local reporters all over the country that do nothing but do what? Cover courts. Pick a public process or body and just cover it, right? In your local community, you're the one who's most likely to know what that is. Okay? And by the way, if you have ideas about this, find me on my social media. I'm Lisa Loving on Facebook, Lisa Loving on Twitter, and L Loving on Instagram. I love answering questions. I love brainstorming, and I'm the queen of pep talks. And I would love to just boost anybody's signal on whatever you're working on. I guarantee that there's somebody doing this exact thing right now, and it might be a court case. It might be some sort of public hearing about something. And where I live in Oregon, a really important public official was just caught doing an unethical thing, and there will no doubt be some sort of hearing about it. Things like that. Find a public process that matters to you. Another one where I live is that the levee system. We live in Portland at the convergence of the Columbia and Willamette Rivers. And it turns out that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has declined to certify our levee system. Like they did that 5 years ago. No one's covering it. Means that thing could collapse. I live in the flood zone. Everyone who lives near it could lose everything, and you cannot get affordable health insurance. Look in your local, affordable flood insurance. Look in your local community at some issue that's really throbbing, something that's really important, and find some sort of public process that is covering that, right? I bet there's somebody who can think of that right now. Related to that, there's also this super fascinating organization called the Chicago Documenters Project. Kind of adjacent to finding a public process and covering it like a court case is the idea of finding municipal policy bodies and covering what they do. What am I talking about? Your local city council, the drainage district in Portland, Oregon. How about the Multnomah County board of directors? Many towns also have public development commissions. Look in where you live for the public policy making bodies, the people that set the rules. I mean, and you could look at your state legislature, which makes the laws too. That counts too. That's always going to be more complicated. You would have to break it down. But look at public policy bodies that are working on or not working on things that matter where you live, and cover them. Show up. The Chicago Documenters Project, it's in Chicago, pays information gatherers, not professional journalists, but information gatherers, to attend public meetings, record them, transcribe them, and upload them to a common website. So that, and you can imagine Chicago is a huge city. So as part of this project, when they are able to assign reporters to every aspect of it, is there a police accountability body? Right? They are able, and I know this sounds boring, okay, but they're able to actually put every elected official and appointed official on the record and every process on the record so that anyone who is affected by those issues can go find those records. They can either read them, they can watch the video of it, and they can access that, maybe even impact it or organize around it. What I love about that project is too, it hires everyday people and teaches them the most basic skills of journalism. And it pays a living wage. That's key. People should be paid, y'all. Anyway, what struck me when I was watching the civil unrest in the streets of Portland in 2020 was that every single issue, I'm so proud of myself that I'm not cursing because I almost dropped a little bomb there. Every single issue was reflected in some boring policy meeting by some boring policy panel that's kicking some can down the road. And if you could find a way to link the public outrage to the conduits where policy is supposed to be forwarded by the elected or appointed officials that are supposed to be responsible for it, you get 10,000 gold stars. I give them all to you. Because that way, you can take the people who are energized in the street and plug them into the policy machine. And I think that if we could do more of that, our communities would be very different. I'm going to stop here and say capitalism, right? There's capitalism. Capitalism is our economic system. Maybe you don't want to hear me say that. There's probably always going to be limits to ways that we can cover municipal bodies. And my friends that were in the street in the city of Portland in 2020 would be the first ones to say, you can never reform a system. You can only pull it down. But one thing that you can do is you can shine a light on the specific people who are supposed to be in charge of these systems. You might even encourage and inspire somebody else to take control of those systems. So in a way, you're taking the blunt instrument of public outrage and you're sharpening it and honing it into a tool that people can use to try to make their lives better now, whether the system's collapsing, whether that levee collapses or not. I think this is important, and I don't think your journalism teacher's going to tell you that, because in journalism school, you're taught, don't glom on to a cause. But if you don't pay attention to some of these outrageous causes, I don't even know who you are. I don't know if this is an AI thing or not. We have Nazis marching in the street of my town. We have white supremacists who have murdered people in the street, murdered people on TriMet. What did the TriMet board do about it? These things are linked. And you don't need a journalism degree to go out and start live tweeting these meetings, blogging about them, bringing a recording device and just recording them. Just as an aside, where I live, the city council meetings, all these meetings are recorded and you can watch the live stream. And the live stream is flowed over onto YouTube. YouTube is one of the most powerful tools of information sharing anywhere. Some people say YouTube is actually the biggest search engine in the world. But I'll tell you what, when people are at these meetings, sometimes the live stream doesn't work and it's like, whoops, sorry. There's no backup for that. But also, whatever we call the Portland Development Commission, no offense, Portland Development Commission, it's got some euphemistic new name. No, I don't know that anybody records those. A lot of these meetings don't get recorded. And just as a continued aside, part of the importance of doing this work isn't just gathering the information, but it's letting these elected officials and these appointed officials know that someone's watching them. And letting them know that people care, because we see all kinds of wackadoodle decisions made behind closed doors. That brings me to another really fun person. Is she on this list? Yeah. Live tweeting public meetings. Her name is Molly Conger. She's the socialist dog mom, right? She is an independent reporter in Charlottesville, where there was a huge white supremacy demonstration. I believe it was in 2018. And a protester was killed by some guy. It was that big demonstration of white supremacists where you saw all these dudes with khakis and tiki torches from the dollar store talking about we will not be replaced, anti-Semitic, racist, all of that. A lot of people said, where did this march come from? Where did this movement even come from? And Molly Conger stepped up and started live tweeting their city council, their county, I don't remember what county it is, county board, and a couple other development commissions. And these people went from being anonymous, this is going to sound rude, a bunch of anonymous chuds, to realizing that the whole world was watching them. You could do that too. I want to talk a little bit more about Molly Conger when we go to talking about how to professionalize your stream and your work. But really, Molly Conger's most useful and incredible tool is live tweeting. And if you are a Twitter person, I guess I live on Twitter, No, I never had a blue check. Hello. You realize that some rich chud bought Twitter and he's in the process of dismantling it. It's the same chud that bought some space company and just blew up his rocket and blew up his entire launch pad. And on MSNBC and in the New York Times, people were saying, look, just getting it into the atmosphere was a success. Was it though? Anyway, I'm kind of talking in riddles right now. But Twitter is a place where people share information in real time. It's considered to be a place where a lot more news moves more quickly than on Facebook or what have you. Facebook actually has analytics and tools to shut news down. Facebook was also, in its earlier years, a place where news happened and people organized. But wow, Facebook itself is a crime scene. Facebook is a digital crime scene. And if you try to share your stuff there, the analytics nails you down and doesn't let you, it won't let you share information about demonstrations and organize. I'm just saying that really quickly. So even over time, these tools change and shift for reasons. And it's your job to figure out the better tool. Okay? I'm saying that to you, man. It's your job to figure out the better tool, whatever that looks like, whether it's TikTok or Vine. TikTok, we could talk later after this a little bit more about the downside of all these tools. There is no perfect tool. Write something on a paper airplane and chuck it out there. I don't know. A tree stump, you stand on it and tell people things. Nothing's perfect, but it's your job to figure out what works for you. It's nobody else is going to come to you and tell you that. Okay, so we just talked about following a public process and live tweeting it or covering it. We talked about following public bodies, policy bodies. If you live in the United States, there's never enough people covering state legislatures, and state legislatures are so important. That's where laws are made. There's so much backroom dealing in state legislatures. And even in states that have healthy newspapers, there's never enough people to cover everything that needs to be covered. If you really were a wonder person, if you were really ambitious, you'd figure out a way to cover state legislatures. Where I live in Oregon, there's actually amazing digital tools to do that, but there's not enough reporters learning how to do it. There's not enough everyday people learning how to do it either. Right? State legislatures are kind of a headwaters of laws. And that's a reason why our, I didn't curse then and I almost dropped a bomb. That's a reason why our conservatively controlled Congress is is breaking things up like Roe versus Wade, gun control, even COVID, breaking them up and kicking them back to the states, because state legislatures have so many smoky dark rooms and there's so many backwater places where bad things can happen that are not representative of what people think. Check out Montana right now. Just check out Montana right now. So I'm going to put a great big check, not a blue check, but a great big pay attention to it check by state legislatures, because a lot of the power in this country is being shifted there. And if you can figure out a way to cover that, you'll be ahead of the game. I'm just going to say. And that's information people all over the world care about, right? Okay, now this last thing I want to talk about is my favorite thing. Create an engagement machine and build on it. So, and if I start to cry, it's fine. There's this amazing nonprofit based in Oakland called El Tímpano, the eardrum. I'm going to say it, two master's degree people, two people that got a master's degree, came out of school and they had this huge idea looking at one of our big public health emergencies, the COVID crisis. I want to say 4 years ago, they realized, as two women realized, that no one was reaching out to the Spanish and Mixteca language-speaking communities, right? So they started basically an engagement machine. They thought, we're going to ask people what they know about it and what they want to know about it. And then we're going to report on that. That was the most basic idea. But they did more than that. They actually had an art project where they created a microphone and they invited people to, there should be art of the microphone. They created a microphone that looks like un timpano, an eardrum. It's this big silver whirly thing. I looked at that for 6 months, pictures of it, and thought, this is such an interesting project. God, that is so weird. It's an eardrum. And so they had public events where they invited communities, and there's not enough media for Mixteca speakers, right? They invited people to speak their story, their COVID story, into the microphone. They recorded it, and they reported it back, okay? Reported it back to the community because, see, they don't care what CNN thinks. They don't care what Rupert Murdoch is doing. They wanted to create a project for these communities around here and Spanish and Mixteca communities elsewhere who are just not being served, especially with community health issues, right? So they started out just gathering the stories and reporting them back. They had a blog, right? It's called El Tímpano. You could look it up. But then they had this other idea because one of the things they heard was that people weren't hearing enough about where they could get a booster shot, where they could find out more, where were their masks, where were their free tests and stuff like that. So they created an SMS system, okay? A text-based system where people, because when they surveyed their community, people said they got most of their information from their phones. So they created a system where people could opt in to find out more about COVID information and a few other things too. And so when they got the they were able to say, well, people want to know where there's a free place where you can get shots. So people could opt in, and when there was an event in their neighborhood, they got a text for it. This is so brilliant. So look at what they did. Like they took classic tools and they used them for other things. Like how many times have I heard KNRK, text 872 and find out where the Lampshade Band is playing tonight, right? They took the tool that we've all heard a million times and they bent it towards social justice. I love them forever. There's a couple other projects in other parts of the country that do the same thing. Detroit. I feel like there's a project in Detroit where they had listening sessions and they found out what did people want to hear the most about. They wanted to hear about affordable housing and environmental justice. And people could sign up to get text messages about events and published reports on those things. And so anyone could do that. You don't have to live there. I love this so much. So I really want to plant that seed deeply in people. So again, El Tímpano, they went to their communities, they surveyed them. This is really the first step if you're going to create a real lasting media platform. Survey people, and within the survey, a digital survey or a paper survey, you're gathering people's contact information and you're getting their permission to bind them together into, say, for example, an email or something like that. You're building your community as you go. I love that. I love that. Okay. That was really a lot of the most basic tools that are free tools, really. SMS systems are not free, but surveying people is free. Those were like, I just went through a lot of the free tools, but now I want to shift perspective a little bit and talk about how you can, and this is going to sound very capitalistic, how you can monetize what you're doing. Because if you are out there, I don't care if you're 13 or 43, and you're gathering information, you're making information available, you deserve to be paid. If you're not paid, it's not sustainable. Don't do the Marxist intellectualist thing. Come on, right? Figure out ways to monetize what you do. And I'm going to use this word. The word is Patreon. There's a site called Patreon. There's a few other sites too, but I'm going to start with Patreon. It's a site where you can create your own pages. You can integrate video, audio, written blogs and a few other things too. And people can sign up and pay you like $3 a month. I love that because you don't have to pay a lot, and Patreon itself is a platform. So you will meet other people on Patreon who are also doing their media thing. You could have a podcast. You could just put pictures. I think you can even do cartooning and graphic novels and things of that nature. And in so doing, the only way to make that work though is to be relational. So you can have different levels where people can pay you $3 a month and they'll get your most basic monthly blog. Or they can pay you $10 a month and they can get your weekly blog and your podcast. Or, you can have all these levels going up to $20 a month, and then they can get a hoodie or whatever. You're breaking down your media offerings in ways that people can afford. I love the Patreon model, and I think there's others like it too. I don't think you necessarily have to go to Patreon, but it's one of the most well-established and one of the most listened to podcasts in the world, broadcasts from Patreon, right? And these people make hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. I don't like them. I'm not naming their name, but you may know who I'm talking about. Patreon allows you to also live stream. Right? There are certain people who do their podcast live via Patreon. You can flow it into other platforms like Zoom even, or maybe you would start at Zoom and move it through Patreon. There's a definite media plumbing. And you can do your homework to see which of these platforms connects to the others. You could go from your Patreon can flow to your YouTube, can flow to your Facebook, right? And you can be reaching all kinds of people. It just depends on what works for you. But you really need to think about monetizing what you're doing. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a professional. And I'm just going to come down hard on this one. Molly Conger, I had said I was going to talk about her a little bit later. Okay. I love her. She's the socialist dog mom, okay? And she's got 2 Dachshunds, Otto and Buck, because she's the socialist dog mom, right? And remember what I said? I was talking a little bit earlier about the ground rules for journalism. If you have a perspective, plant a flag on it and be honest about it. Be transparent about it. She's the socialist dog mom. So that means she's a progressive person, right? She's not going to be pushing Democratic candidates. But what's super fun about her is that the sugar in her thread, the sugar in her stream, is pictures of Otto and Buck. I know that sounds ridiculous because she does hard news. But she sweetens the pot with these 2 adorable Dachshunds, all these videos and pictures of them, and now she's on TikTok, and so you're going to be deep into, this is what white supremacy looks like when it's embodied on the city council. But to kind of reel back your anxiety, here's Otto and Buck, they're going on a hike, right? And she monetizes that when one of them, Otto or Buck, I think it was Otto, had to have surgery a couple years ago. She was able to crowdfund the cost of the surgery because she'd built such a huge, you could say following, but she's really building a community around what she does. The socialist dog mom. Check her out. Another thing I wanted to talk about, in terms of professionals, right? People who were independent journalists in the streets of Portland in 2020 and now used the experiential knowledge that they gained from covering the unrest in the street. I really want to shout out Justin Yao. He's P Documentarians on Twitter, but I think he's on TikTok as well. P Documentarians, that used to be Portland Documentarians, right? I think he had maybe just come out of journalism school. And so he is an independent journalist who took his equipment out onto the streets in Portland, and now he's a foreign correspondent in the Ukraine. He used his photography, his video in covering I'm going to say civil unrest. And he was able to build his following and monetize it to the degree that he can become a foreign correspondent in his own right. And his stuff is picked up by Reuters, CNN, people all over the world. I just want to stop for a minute because you know I'm the queen of rabbit holes. Me and Alice in Wonderland. You notice I'm not saying riots in the street of Portland, right? Riots in the street of Portland in 2020, where we saw civil unrest 200 nights. You know, George Floyd's father thanked Portland, Oregon for doing that. This is unheard of. One of the whitest cities in America. I just, as an aside, when we're talking about stuff like this, riot is a police designation, right? Something's only a riot if the police declare it so. You've heard that phrase, reading the riot act. That is a literal thing. The police have to literally read a script. It has to be broadcast into the crowd. And then that gives the police literally the legal right to do all kinds of things that they did not have the right to do before the riot act was read. So that was just one little circle I wanted to draw around that in case you wondered. When there's civil unrest, that is the most obvious place for someone to go out with your equipment and follow a public process and bring information to the world. Because when Justin Yao, when Molly Conger, right, Brandy Buckman, they went and covered their small thing, these became global stories. They're part of a web of, white supremacy, colonialism that is important that we understand how it impacts our local community. I sound like some heckin' college professor. Okay, now I have one last thing I want to talk about because it's really weird and people probably will not relate, but it's super important. So far we've been talking about, God, I talk a lot, huh? I talk like a press release. So far we've been talking about like news media. You know, and news media is often designed for, your neighbor or the people who live with you in your town or the people who live with you in your state. You know, you need to know that there's white supremacists who are actually on the city council and they're actually talking about this stuff and you need to know about it and you should probably vote them out of office. You know, normally everything I've talked about so far is about breaking news, but there's another really important media place where you can be super impactful, and that's in the historic record. Oral histories, the things that historians, academics, people of the future, space aliens, they always come out of the center of the earth, whatever. The information that forms the record that people understand in the future, that is just as important. It may not seem as impactful as I want to talk a little bit about Juniper Simonis when we do questions in a minute. It may not seem as impactful as Dr. Juniper Simonis, who was a master's degree student, a PhD student in evolutionary biology, who got caught up in the 2020 civil unrest and then realized that if people started collecting all of the different tear gas and munitions, garbage that the police were leaving, that it could be possible to find out what was actually being pumped into the environment by the police. Dr. Juniper Simonis, I'm going to put her in this category of the public record because she was on Twitter. TikTok it existed in 2020, but people didn't use it the same way as people use it now. And she crowdsourced that on Twitter, specifically Twitter. And she would say, collect these munitions, wear gloves, put them in a bag, and bring them to me here. Dr. Juniper Simonis happens to be an incredible trans woman, and I just want to say that too. Shout out to all the incredible trans people who are watching right now because I love you very much. So I don't know if you paid attention, but last month, was it a research organization in England came out with this major scientific report about how the law enforcement in Portland, it was not just the Portland police, but it was law enforcement jurisdictions in Portland in 2020 used so much chemical munitions that it affected the public health. They documented how people with uteruses actually started menstruating the day after they were caught in some of these clouds. It impacted people's reproductive health. And really, I don't think that could have even been possible without Dr. Juniper Simonis. I didn't see her name anywhere in that study. I didn't see her name anywhere in the public reports about it. But she was the one who called on people, look at the trees. Look at what happened to the trees. These were the munitions that we found at the bottom of this tree. She also called people, she's an evolutionary biologist now, to take water samples. Look at this is going right into the Willamette River. This is poison. It's going into the Willamette River. When you stop for a second and think about the historic record, it may not necessarily be a breaking news story today, but it's part of understanding what just happened. And also, why are people sick 2 years from now or a year from now or what have you? Public health is a really important place for people to pay attention to things like that. We have so many public health problems in the United States today. COVID, of course, but also gun violence is a public health problem. The denial of medical services to people who are in different places of the gender binary, that's also definitely a public health problem, because we're seeing that people who, trans youth are among the highest suicide demographic. When I think about oral histories, right? I just want to look at people and say, think about oral histories. Oral histories is one of the most joyful things to do. I actually have been taking my phone to my mom in between watching MSNBC and asking her, she's 92, asking her to tell stories about her career in medicine, because she was a nurse for almost 50 years. And I've been recording her stories about medical school, desegregating the operating room in Maryland in 1958 and stuff like that. It's incredible, the stories that she's had to tell. And a lot of them about Los Angeles General Hospital, Los Angeles Memorial Hospital. So sometimes oral histories can matter in a super hyper local community, but sometimes they can have impact in a larger community. And when we talk about oral histories, and I'm working on how to do oral history training that I'd love to share soon. I really want to strongly encourage people to remember that kids are part of the history. We should be doing oral histories right now and interviewing all the teenagers. Kids have experiential knowledge. History is not just a thing that people with gray hair who dye their roots, I think they look pretty good right now. It's not something for old people. Our young people today are at the forefront of the climate movement. Our young people today are at the forefront of understanding the impacts of fentanyl. Young people today are at the forefront of the movement for transgender rights and medical rights for kids who want to be transgender or who want to understand what's happening to them. Always think of the teenagers. If you're a teenager watching this, you rock, and you're the most likely person to be innovating all of these tools in the future. So yeah, gather oral histories. Take your phone. You could do it with your cell phone. You could do it with a camera. You can do it with recording. But gathering the oral histories is what people 20 years from now and 40 years from now, all those people that are getting their PhD and whatnot, are going to be looking for. That's what I've got. That's a lot. I talk a lot. But I can't say this enough. I went to journalism school, but you don't have to. These tools are easy. You just need to be dedicated, fair, accurate, and transparent. And if you're not fact-checking, it's not journalism. So, does anybody have any questions?
Well, yeah, about the fact-checking. I mean, how do you say you gather a lot of video footage of something and you go to some meetings and what thought process needs to make you realize what it is you have to check, and then how do you go about digging deeper?
Because we all just watch whatever the heck happened with Tucker Carlson, right? In the examples that I've been talking about, fact-checking is, if you go to journalism, sometimes they'll say, back up every fact with 2 documents or two pieces of evidence. Sometimes they'll say 3. Fact-checking is about looking at what documents what you just said. What's in the city council meeting, what's on the agenda, and what did somebody say in public. Where I live, the Willamette Week, I have to give it to you guys. You've been doing really good work. Willamette Week has been doing this fascinating reporting because we have so much poverty in my town, and there's just so many people living on the sidewalk. In San Francisco and Portland, we're very much alike, right? Portland is way small. So what the Willamette Week did was they did this series where they just looked at abandoned houses, and they just went and dug up the records on those houses, and not abandoned houses, big abandoned buildings, right? And they had this feature, I forgot what it's called, ghost buildings or something like that. And so they just literally have this format where this is who owns it, this is how long they've owned it, this is what it's worth, this is the last time it was inhabited, and just what the documents say. And a lot has come from that. They publicly shamed the richest real estate family in the city and forced them to board up this open-air fentanyl market that had been festering in downtown for 20 years. Like, their coverage of this did that after 20 years. The city couldn't even do it. And speaking of that fentanyl market, I just love what they've done lately. One of their reporters went to and did a public records request at the Portland Police Bureau for all of the arrests at that one address. A lot of times, wherever you live, and by the way, the fact-checking chapter of my Orange book, Street Journalist, is my favorite chapter. It's very specific, like what records exist. How do you think like a document? Fact-checking is finding where the facts are either written down or they're broadcast or written down or broadcast, basically. But their reporter went and asked and did a public document search for a Freedom of Information Act request for all of the arrests at this one address for a 1 month period, or maybe it was even a 1 day period. And so they were able to bring what the arrest was for, what the fentanyl, it was all fentanyl arrests, what the quantity of fentanyl was, the name of the person arrested and where they were from. They didn't publish the name just because you can get the documents. Again, remember that other rule that I'm talking about is don't harm innocent people. Have a sense of where power resides. Oh my God, I'm talking like Game of Thrones right now. Who's the dragon and who's the peon, right? You just keep in mind who could be damaged by this stuff. But so the Willamette Week, they did this feature where they basically shared 7 arrest records, and every person but one who was arrested was from Honduras, selling fentanyl. And they had quotes from the cop report, how much the pills were, what did this person tell the police, I'm saving money to get off the street or whatever. I feel like that story told a lot. I don't really think that we're learning enough about, we've been watching on the news that the COVID border laws that Trump put into effect are expiring. And so now there's a crush of people coming over the Mexican border, and Texas is getting overrun, and yada, yada, la-di-da. And I don't really think that we hear enough about what's really impactful about those situations. But people in those situations would know more. That's just one example. So how to fact check in general. Look for documents. Look where things are written down or recorded or broadcast. And then from that pile of information, reach in and find what's most important. A lot of this stuff is in the Street Journalist. That's really the gist of this book, like how to report a story. You're gathering information that's information, not just somebody's opinion. Although sometimes somebody's opinion is the story. And I don't know if you were reading the Washington Post today where they're talking about, and I can laugh right now, what really got Tucker Carlson fired was kind of his opinion about some things. So that was a moment when his opinion actually was the story. But there are concrete tools that we can use for that. And I really want to encourage people to reach for the documents and the recordings.
setting out to be a street or community journalist and cover your local community, do you need to have a following on your social media platforms or your blog or in some way, or should you, or do you, how do you go about building that following, or do you just do the journalism first? If you're doing quality journalism, then you build the community or the following that way. Sort of which comes first, or do you kind of go about both at the same time?
I love that question. Thank you for asking it. Remember I said journalism is relational, not transactional, right? Relational meaning you're working with people, you're building relationships with them. It's probably easier to start some sort of journalistic platform if you have a following. But that can also be a trap, because I don't know if you've heard of a guy named Tim Pool. Hi, Tim. I'm sure you're not watching this right now. Tim Pool started out as years ago as a journalist. He took photos, he took video, and now he's a right-wing ideologue who probably makes $1 million a year because he got that big following, and then he started ringing the bells to keep the following going. But if you're interested in starting a journalism platform, I want to encourage you to go onto the platforms that resonate with you and find other people who do similar things. When I was starting my Twitter account, and I'm so old that my Twitter account is at Lisa Loving. Whoa, that's old, okay? Now it's like Lisa Loving 10,000. I sound like a Hal movie. But the first thing I did was find other people doing something like me. Find the other journalists, find the other grassroots journalists. And I also was looking for community radio reporters and journalists and programmers. Find people who do what you do and follow them, interact with them, ask them questions, and at the same time, put out your reporting at the same time. If you could be connected with or affiliated with a grassroots outlet, that's a huge help. And with that in mind, I want to encourage anyone who lives someplace where there's a community radio or a community broadcast television station, and volunteer there. Volunteer for a newsroom. Also, high school newspapers, man, and college newspapers, they have incredible followings. Join a community, join a circle of people, and build on that. Interact with them. Retweet their tweets. Ask them questions. Engage them. The other way to begin a platform is, like I talked about, El Tímpano. And I'm trying to remember the name of my favorite start your own YouTube channel promoter. Oh, I'm forgetting her name. She's an English woman who came from television. She's always going to tell you to start with a survey. She's going to tell you that if you create surveys, and there's many, many free survey tools of all kinds, put out surveys to people, always be promoting your survey and always be asking people to participate in it. And the survey could be something as simple as, what kind of news do you really want? Or do you really care about gun violence, and do you want to hear more about it? Everyone who answers your survey, their contact information comes into your space. And this wonderful woman whose name I did not write down, but I adore her. She started out her internet space with a YouTube station and a training called Confidence on Camera. Who doesn't want that? You're not even going to be on TV, but you sort of want to know what that's about. So she created a survey that said, do you have anxiety about being in a photo? Do you dream of maybe having do you dream of being a YouTuber? Right? She built a community of people that wanted to learn how to build a community of people. You hear me? So surveys are a really powerful tool. And you can another place that people do this, and we're talking about how do you start a following. I'm going back to Molly Conger. And it sounds cheesy to say it, but her little dogs are just a honeypot. That I mean that in the nicest way. I think I can say that on a camera. You can do it with your cat. I'm going to say this. Dr. Juniper Simonis used thirst trap photos, and a bunch of those 2020 reporters did that. They'd be, I know this sounds crazy, I'm saying it, but they'd be, these are the munitions, these are pictures of the munitions, and here's my thirst trap. I know, what do I mean by that? Pictures of themselves in underwear. I'm saying that. And some people, they're comfortable in that space. But creating and inviting social media space that's got things in it that people want to see. Remembering also that when it comes to podcasting, when it comes to YouTubes and digital media in general, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And I'm not talking about a really scary horror movie. You have to find ways to lighten it up sometimes. If you can show the human side of yourself, that's a big plus. Podcasts are interesting because really, there's all kinds of different kinds of podcasts, but really at its heart, people love a podcast of people that they want to talk to. The most successful podcasts, really the most successful podcasts, are podcasts where the people, for whatever reason, are considered to be likable. So it is your job to do your homework on that. And this all could change, again, be autodidactic, figure out how the person or the group that you admire the most did it, right? That's always the best thing. If you can reverse engineer is the phrase, reverse engineer the successful path of someone that you really admire. That's always the very best thing you can do. Yeah. Anybody have questions?
About some of the, people in your workshops that you've worked with, have you seen some good examples come out of that?
My friend Corey Elia, he might be watching right now. He is one who started out, Corey, I'm going to talk as if Corey's here. I might be misremembering, but he started out at the community radio station, and he and a wonderful other friend of ours started a podcast about cannabis culture. Built-in honeypot, honestly. Based in Portland, Oregon. I'm trying to remember what it's called, and I'm not sure if they still do it. So he started out with a podcast where they interviewed really interesting cannabis pioneers and entrepreneurs, and then came the civil unrest. Oh my God, I'm not going to talk about what happened to them. Some of these amazing journalists faced danger and were injured, and that's real, and you need to be real about that too. Being in a war zone. Justin, it's okay if I cry. Justin Yao, who I talked about, P-documentarians, he was beaten and arrested. And another, just a fantastic, beloved independent journalist, Sergio Olmos. I think they both came out of the University of Oregon. While they were at the University of Oregon, they did incredible photojournalism. They were photojournalists. And they were able to build a following within I think they were able to start their following within their work as they were in college, which means that they connected with professors who connected them to other people that helped them get Sergio Olmos. He got some gigs with the New York Times because the quality of his work was so good. And so when Justin Yao was beaten and arrested, Sergio Olmos, he basically stayed by the door where where people were released from the cop shop. And he waited until Justin Yao was released because he was there when Justin Yao was arrested. And sometimes some of these relationships, they may seem emotional, they may seem unimportant, but they build on each other. They're relational. They're real people. We all are watching this. This was not professional journalism. This was Sergio Olmos saying, and Justin Yao has now been released. And it was a drama. We were all on the edge of our seats. Thousands of people from all over the world watched that. So How do you start your following? How do you begin? Corey, the same thing happened with Corey and his podcasting partner. They were arrested. There was drama around them. And that's hard, right? But anyway, Corey doing really good work and doing the shoe leather of selling that work too. Contacting media outlets. I have this. Do you want it? And then Corey decided to go to the University of Oregon and get his multimedia master's degree, which he just finished. Good for you, man. People live their lives. They go towards the story. They do quality work. And sometimes they break. It's real. It's transparent. And they're building community around their work. And there's no button. I'm not going to use the word silver bullet. That stresses me out. I don't know who's a vampire around here or a werewolf that needs silver bullets, but there's no real easy path. There's no guaranteed path. But if you're doing quality work, you know what you're talking about. You're relational. You're working and elevating the other professionals around you. Have you ever heard the theory of the long tail? This theory of the long tail, it shows up in a lot of places. For example, you have your small business, you've got your bookstore, you've got everything going, you've got your bookstore email, and then all of a sudden something happens and your following goes like this. And this was your long tail. It's all the work you did, all the groundwork you did until something important happened and you were ready and you rocketed up. That's the best you can do. Yeah. Be relational, and be transparent.
Okay.
That's he got heavy at the end. It got heavy at the end. I am Lisa Loving. I'm the author of Street Journalist, Understand and Report the News in Your Community. I'm at Lisa Loving on Twitter. I'm at Lisa Loving on Facebook. You don't have to go to these places. I am at L Loving on Instagram. I love it when people contact me. I love supporting what you do. I never get tired of it. And look, if you're watching this, I'm a rabbit hole. So don't even think about asking me about the redheaded prince and whatever's happening in England. Yeah, do it. Do it. And I just want to thank everyone for tuning in and listening wherever you may be right now. It's all about you, and you're the one that's going to innovate journalism. Nobody else is going to do it. So thanks for watching.